Welcome to the Nate KG podcast, where I talk with jump ropers of all skill levels with different styles, geographical locations, and fitness goals to answer the simple but all-encompassing question, what is jump rope to you? In this episode, I talk with Sonny Smith at The Unconventional Ropstress on Instagram. Sonny describes herself as a, quote, jump rope enthusiast, but she is far more than that. Not only does she have a variety of unique training tools and methods, which we get into during our conversation, but she also discusses mental health and the positive impacts jump rope has on the mind, both from a biological and psychological perspective. She is absolutely one of the top leaders and pioneers in this jump rope space for sure, and we get into a lot of subjects, including her workout style and how she aims for a flow state when she jumps. Sonny was also kind enough to share a lot of her mental health journey in our conversation, and I was truly impressed by how gracefully she speaks about such serious topics. While anxiety and depression, among other mental health subjects, are often talked about in a very heavy and grave manner, Sonny approaches them with such an optimistic passion and a real matter-of-factness. So I would encourage that, A, if you're not familiar with mental health topics, don't shy away from listening, because you're absolutely going to gain a new perspective from Sonny without being, emotionally stuffed to the brim. And B, for those who have faced or are currently facing any form of mental health challenge, Sonny will offer so much to relate to and a few of the small adjustments that made a huge impact for her. Also, we have some solid laughs, especially about Sonny's older sisters making her a permanent turner for double dutch when she was young, which if you've ever done double dutch, you know that's a huge bummer. Also, just a heads up that all the info and social links from this conversation can be found in the podcast notes at natekg.com. So with that being said, let's get into my conversation with Sonny Smith. Hey, Sonny, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. I'm so happy to be here with you and have the opportunity to speak to you about something that we both love and enjoy thoroughly.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation because we have a lot to get into, and we've had a little bit of chatting offline before we started recording, and we got some good stuff to go over.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
So to get started, so where are you in the world? Where do you live?
I am in the what most people know as the DMV. I'm in Maryland, but very close to the Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland concentrated area. So I'm from Alexandria, Virginia, but I currently live in Southern Maryland.
Nice. And is that like where you grew up your whole life?
Yes, I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia.
Nice. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So what kind of fitness, sports stuff have you done?
So I am a basketball head through and through. I played basketball throughout my entire life, really. I went to the University of Maryland on a full basketball scholarship.
Oh, wow.
So basketball is huge for me. But I've always been an athletic kid. But yeah, basketball is my first love.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
So you've been doing that for a long time then?
Yeah, for quite some time. Since I've graduated, I've kind of put the ball down and picked a few other things up. So,
what things?
But the physical activity it has never ceased. So unconventional styles of training, and that probably kind of speaks to my handles on social media, particularly Instagram. So I'm really into kettlebell training, the steel mace, steel clubs, the jump rope, body weight training, things like that. So finding me doing more the traditional forms of exercises, kind of in a bench press rack or under a squat rack. And just those aren't things that you'll typically find me doing. And not that I feel like anything's wrong with them. It just isn't my preferred approach to fitness. I prefer types of fitness that I think requires me to stay in tune and aligned both mentally and physically. So the tools that I tend to gravitate towards require a certain level of intention and mindfulness to always be present, one, so that you're safe, and to be able to call upon different skill sets and kind of meld them into one, or different exercises and meld them into a sequence or flow, if you will, of exercises. So I really gravitate towards those tools, the jump rope included, for that reason.
So when it comes to like your fitness goal, I would imagine it's less in terms of like specifically your aesthetic and more of a specific feeling you're trying to get, or is that true?
Absolutely. You actually couldn't have stated that any better. My fitness goals actually have very little to do, if anything, with aesthetics. And to me, I think that's a huge positive, and something that I think if more people approached fitness in that way, that kind of feeling of when you get discouraged because you've hit a plateau and the scale isn't moving anymore, and then you'll find at that point that many people they either quit or they end up taking this long hiatus, and then you find yourself having to start over at square one. My intention, or the reason that I work out, is specifically and solely for the proven mental health benefits and the mood enhancing benefits that come immediately following an exercise session or a workout session. And then you find, if you kind of change the narrative, you start to find that the 6-pack abs and the chest and the biceps and all of these things just become positive side effects of exercise, to where, yeah, those plateaus that you're hitting, or those areas or those places that are those snags in the road, you find those less when you kind of shift the narrative as to what your goals are. And I don't think that means that, you shouldn't have goals. Like if you want to lose 15 to 20 pounds, there are certain things that you got to start doing dietary, from an eating standpoint. But just in terms of, kind of getting stuck, if there's ever time to chase a high, I always say this, if there's ever time to chase a high, I think it's the one that you get after working out. And when you kind of focus on those mood benefits and those benefits of mental clarity and all those things that literally come with every workout session, I think, you find yourself less and less at places in your workout regimen or your journey where you're becoming discouraged with certain things not happening aesthetically.
Okay, so I really want to wrap back around to that mental clarity, but first, just as a quick, detour before we get there. So this might seem very nuanced, but what specifically are you doing during your workouts, and what kind of is the routine?
So I'll be the first to say that I don't necessarily have a routine. So I'm not one of those people who sits down and I have a younger brother, and he's very much like an A-type personality, to where he'll sit down and he'll literally create like a 12-week program with his set goals. And I mean, he goes in and he crushes it, and some people are that way, and they need that to be successful. It's just a way that I think that they're able to process what they're doing. I literally will kind of, so I think one of the main things I do, and it's allowed me some flexibility. So I don't have like designated arm or leg days, or today's biceps or today's chest. Everything I do is compound, right? So I focus entirely on compound movements, so that I'm working chest, legs, biceps, triceps. I'm hitting that every single day, but I'm also doing it in a way where, I don't necessarily have to take days off. And I don't say that to get it confused with, you don't need to take rest days, but it isn't in a fashion where, I've completely obliterated my chest and my back today. Yep. So trying to do that again tomorrow simply isn't feasible. Right. Or I'm putting myself in a position where if I try to go do that a couple days in a row, I'm now putting myself at risk for injury. So I like circuit training, and I borrow a bit from kind of the the CrossFit world, where, you've got the every minute on a minute style approach to training, or, your Tabata styles, or just a straight up circuit, where you've got 8 exercises that you're doing for, with a work to rest ratio of, like, let's say 45 seconds to 15 seconds. And that'll be one set, and then you rest a minute and 30 seconds. And then, you do a total of, 3 to 5 sets. And that's typically how my workouts are structured, in a circuit fashion with all compound movements.
Okay.
And then the tools, like I said, the tools that I use daily are kettlebells, the jump rope, the steel mace are my, and body weight training are my top 3.
The steel mace is really cool.
Oh God, it's right now. I think it's highly, I won't say underrated, because I think that most people just aren't aware. But it's really taking off, and there are some huge pioneers in the game that I've had the pleasure to study under, and learn from directly, and train with, and to learn from, and I'm very grateful for those experiences. But I think in 5 years, you'll have a steel mace in every single gym, and I mean commercial and everything.
Interesting.
It's really taking off. But that that kind of off, I don't want to say off center or off balance style of
Off axis.
yes. Thank you for that. I was
Mm-hmm.
struggling a bit on how to explain that, but you just don't have many tools where all of the weight of the tools on one end,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. of the apparatus, and so the steel mace challenges you in ways that you won't find another fitness tool be able to do, and I think it's really going to take off here in the near future.
So when you walk into the gym, you're kind of just thinking, okay, like I'm feeling a little bit of steel mace today, maybe some squats, and then triple unders and some side swings. Like, is that what happens?
So normally there's, I'll kind of set out a few different compound kettlebell movements or steel mace movements. And there's this concept that I talk about a lot, that I've kind of applied to jump roping, as well, called a flow. And so that term is it's very popular in, you'll hear kettlebell flow, you'll hear steel mace flow. And that's really just a way to pair, like your squat with the traditional bicep to, a press. But to do it, like I said, in ways that are compound movements, and you string all of these movements together and they flow seamlessly into one another. So I normally put together different flows, if you will, or I'll kind of structure like, today's workout, or like yesterday's workout, for instance. I'll give you a breakdown of yesterday's workouts. Was like a 5x5, and in the kettlebell community, someone put this out as they called it, I believe, the donkey complex, where you've got right. Sometimes these names are like they're amazing because you kind of get to throw out whatever you want.
Yeah.
But you'll see it kind of resonate throughout the different communities, because I do believe that I belong to a few different communities in the fitness world. But it was so you start off with 5 kettlebell snatches, then you immediately transition into 5 seesaw press, 5 each arm, and then that immediately transitions into 5 kettlebell cleans, and that immediately then goes into 5 kettlebell front squats, and then into 5 gorilla rows. And you do this all in a sequential fashion. You don't put the bell down until you're finished with that entire complex, and that entire complex would be one set. So I did that, and then immediately following that, I would transition into 50 weighted double unders.
Okay.
And then
how heavy was the rope?
That one, I believe, may have been about 12 ounces. So not quite a pound, but just under a pound. And so you go into 50 double unders, and then I do kind of like an active rest core exercise, so like a plank. So I'll do that for about 30 seconds, and then rest about anywhere between 15 to 30 seconds, and then repeat that cycle 5 times, and that's my entire workout.
That's awesome.
And then I always start or finish my workout with a freestyle session. So
cool.
So I typically post. I don't post my full workouts as much as I post freestyling with the jump rope. And freestyling is a part of every single time that I work out. So I won't say that I work out every day, but every day that I work out, I freestyle, right? Kind of depending on, so like to me, that can kind of take on like a life of its own, and why I've chosen to kind of throw the flow term towards that as well. Because for me, that's kind of what happens, right? Like I'll get started, and that's what I used to warm up. I'll kind of just start jumping, and then I let my brain and my body become one, and then, whatever happens just kind of happens, right? And it's there, you enter kind of like this flow state. And so freestyling is how I warm up. It's how I cool down. Sometimes I've had it turn into a whole entire session where like I've gone in with a clear plan, right? And then an hour later, I realize I've done nothing but jumping rope, but I've also now got nothing left to give. So we're gonna have to go ahead and call it a day.
Pack it up.
Right, go ahead and pack it up, right? And so so that's my approach to working out. That was kind of long-winded, but
no, yeah. Do you separate like flowing, right? The flow freestyle versus skill training for like a new freestyle skill?
So yes, I actually do, because when I'm in like freestyle session, I get there once I feel like I've put in the work, once I feel like I've earned the right to throw that move or whatever new skill I'm trying to learn. I feel like, you've got to, so there's a saying, you got to earn the right to flow, right? And that comes with, putting in a certain level of work and dedication into learning something through and through, and not saying, hey, just by chance, I did this once and I caught it on camera. So look,
Right.
I'm proficient at doing this skill, right? Because in real life, like, no, you're not. You just cleared it one time, right?
Right.
And so for me, my skill training, a lot of times I'll throw that into, like, when I'm doing circuit training, like with a kettlebell. So I'll do, eight exercises, right? And it'll be 4 kettlebell moves, 4 jump rope skills. And it'll be 45 seconds of whatever compound kettlebell exercise, right? 45 seconds, 15-second rest, and then I go into whatever that jump rope skill is. And so I've actually now spent an entire workout, because then you go through that set 4 different times. So I've devoted an entire workout to 2 or 3 skills, learning 2 or 3 skills. And that doesn't ever really end up on camera, right? But that's the work I put in to then take those skills and throw into a freestyle, right? Like, I feel like then I've earned the right to throw this into a freestyle. And then that's what I post, because at the end, the freestyle is like, that's what I'm working for, the ability to be able to call upon, the work that I've put in to learn different things, to then put them together seamlessly, all while being mindful, all while being intentional, all while knowing that I've earned this right to flow. And that's why I typically tend to post my freestyles versus, the work that I put in to get there. Because that's kind of my grunt and grit and glory, if you will, right? Because that's where a lot of that, they're like these tiny wins is what I call them. And then the freestyle would be, the pat on the back, where it's like, you did it, like, you put in this work, you went out and you put in the blood, sweat, and the tears. You went and got these tiny wins for that big one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think freestyling in and of itself is such an underrated art, because it really takes a level of skill to be able to recall upon various different skills that kind of flow seamlessly into one another, so that your flows or your freestyling is just that. It's free style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not,
Yep.
It's like, it's more of a feeling
Absolutely.
than it is, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this next, and then I'm going to do this next. Once you've kind of mastered, and I won't even say master, because with the jump rope, I think one of the things that I've learned, that there's no such thing, like, because once you've done something, right, there's always a level, or there's always another notch to step that up, right? So there's really no mastering one move, but I'm proficient enough to be able to recall upon this at any given time on most days, right? Because we all know that there are bad days as well. It's just like, you can't catch the rope at all. Like, I can't catch anything, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
So that's why I tend to post my freestyles, because for me, it isn't even to showboat or anything like that, or to, like, there's this notion that on social media, people only show their best.
Yep.
And again, I think that's a good and a bad thing. Perspective is everything. So it kind of depends on how you look at it. It's like, I can show you the work I put in to get here, but for me personally, that's for me, like, that's to me, that work process is so personal. And then when I feel like I've earned that right, to say that I can do X or Y skill, then I put out the fact that I've worked hard. Like, freestyling for me is a kind of a telltale picture that I've been working, that I've been putting in work. And so that's what I choose to put forth, and that's the reason why.
So 2 things that I want to jump into. One, it sounds like when you're training new freestyle skills, you're always training at a deficit because you're putting them with other skills. Is that true?
I would say so, yes.
Kind of a deficit, or at least you're definitely fatigued.
For sure. But I also think...
Yeah, because like, for me, the world that I grew up in, the jump rope world I grew up in, was very much, you would spend time only doing that skill. So if I'm working on, let's say, well, this is a good example, a handstand backwards pull through, right? Mm-hmm. So you be in a handstand position, you pull the rope backwards, coming back down to the ground, right? I would spend, I remember one day specifically, I did that 102 times for 2 hours, just that.
Wow.
So I wasn't putting that, next stuff, but then sometimes I'll do like a superset of, actually this week, deadlifts plus triple unders.
Right.
Right. But it sounds like what you're doing with freestyle skills is that you're putting a lot of other exercises next to it. So it's actually harder to do it in that moment, but then later it becomes a lot easier when you're in that flow state.
Absolutely. And that's precisely why. So if we go back a little bit to me saying, basketball's been life, and I've spent most of my entire life playing basketball. One of the things, I've picked up from that time is that, you can spend, the first 35 minutes of a 40-minute game and realize that the most important moment, or where you've got to show up the most, is the last 5 minutes of the game, right? So you're almost always operating at a deficit. Like, what I've done at minute 1, I've got to be able to do at minute 38, or, minute 42 if we've gone into overtime. I've got to still be able to pull upon these skills that I had when I was fresh, and my legs weren't fatigued, and I wasn't winded. And that's what separates good teams from great teams, or, good players from great players, are the ones that can still perform at their best, or arguably at their best, at minute 40, the same way they are at minute 1. And I think that I fashion my workouts in that way, because that's just what I'm used to from playing basketball my entire life. Is you've got to still be able to be in it, and to still be able to do it, and do it just as well at minute 38 as you do at minute 1.
Man, that is there are so many parallels there that you could draw just for life in general, but
Absolutely.
We'll get there in a minute.
Absolutely.
But real quick, too, the other thing I wanted to highlight, you said, flow state versus this trick, then this trick, then this trick. Sounds like you're talking about going with it in the moment versus more of a competitive style, which is you're planning out an entire sequence or a routine, and you're trying to hit that same thing over, which is, again, what I grew up in, which is, you've got a minute 15 max to put together this whole routine, and you have to memorize everything in it. That's what I would do, is I would spend practices memorizing the same sequence over and over and over. Whereas your goal, it sounds like with fitness, is you're just trying to pull from your knowledge and your skill set to just kind of have some fun, and it doesn't really matter what's going on. You're just trying to keep moving and keep up that flow.
Right. And you do really well hitting the nail on the head, man. I'm telling you. Because you're absolutely correct. And so that is what the flow state for me is with jump roping. But what I'm learning, and what I'm learning this through one of my favorite people in the jump rope world right now, aside from you, because you already know, I think you're like an angel walking, right?
Oh, thank you.
But Mike at Let's Jump LA, he kind of has a series where he's been putting out these combos of the day. And to me, what I find about them to be so awesome, and what I'm learning is exactly what you said, where it's like these planned sequences, right? And I've always thought that, like, when I watch competitive jumpers jump, like when I watch a you or a Mike jump, to me, it looks like these things are so seamless. And much of it, I'm sure it is, because you guys have just been doing it so long, and it's such just a natural part of what you do, that I've always thought that the flow state for me. So I think my idea of flow kind of came to me erroneously, even, if you will, because as I watch you guys jump, to me, that is a flow state.
It's a different definition of flow.
It's definitely a different definition of flow. And I've always just kind of assumed that you guys, that these things aren't planned out. You guys are just so good, and so it happens. And I do think that is true for most of the competitive jumpers. But then there is that aspect. There is that realm of planning out an entire sequence and nothing being wrong with that, right? Because to be able to hit that to a T 100 times out of 110 is a completely different skill and a completely different level of excellence all in its own. And so with Mike's combos of the day, it's given me a different perspective, or a different approach to flow state, or maybe it's not even a different approach, and they could all be, for me, and this is just, when I say flow state, it's not even a real thing. This is just how I conceptualize and how I think about it. But that they do coexist, right? There is that kind of Zen flow state where the music is moving, your brain and your body have aligned, and whatever happens, it happens. Like, this is just happening, right? But then there's that skill where it's like, I've put together these 6 or 7 moves, and I can do them in sequential fashion over and over and over and over and over again, effortlessly.
Yep.
Like, that's a completely different skill. And I haven't tapped into that world as much, but I'm now learning it, and I'm loving it. So, I'm very thankful to people like you and Mike, who continue to just put out great things for the community to truly learn from and learn about the sport of jump rope, because it's, for many of us, you just don't even know that this is a real thing, right?
Yeah.
So
No, and well, first of all, I really appreciate that. And
yeah, no
second,
problem.
just to touch on that repeated sequences, there's kind of two things there. One, a lot of the reason why competitors are just so darn efficient with their skills is because they've literally done one skill hundreds of thousands of times, just because
Yeah.
that's how what we grew up in and practicing. The other thing too is a lot of times when you see a competitor, just FYI, when you see a competitor that's doing what looks to be an unplanned, very seamless sequence, it's actually usually something that they've practiced for years.
Wow.
Like, because a lot of us, one of the really common things in competitive jump rope is when you're on your team, you end up performing and doing shows just because of the nature of what it is. Honestly, from the time you're 5-6 years old all the way through however long you jump. So a lot of competitors have 4 or 5 different sections of routines that they just know. It's like writing your name. You've written your name so many times that like you can just do it without thinking. So we'll pull that and just if you ever see Eddie Yasinich is a really great example of this, because he's done an incredible amount of shows in all kinds of venues and stuff. And so anytime he jumps, or we go out to like Venice or wherever, and we're doing like, some jumping, and someone says, "Hey, can you show me something?" He's like, "Yeah," because he's done performances so many times. He's doing the exact same sequence usually that he's done so many times. So that's why it looks so easy and so seamless, is because he's actually literally done that same thing a lot of times.
Gotcha. Wow. So you guys are tricking us, huh? I'm kidding.
Yeah,
I'm totally kidding.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny because if you're not familiar with exactly those skills, you're not really sure what's going on. So you wouldn't know the difference. Sometimes, I remember personally when I was, doing performances and stuff, I always wanted to do harder tricks. I was like, in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go do quads because I just learned them. And my coach was like, you can if you want to, but you're the only one that's going to know it's quads. You could do triples and the crowd would be just as happy because they can't tell the difference.
Wow, man, perspective is everything, man.
Right?
Yeah.
Seriously. So actually, let's hop into the beginning of your jumping then, because we've talked a little bit about what you're doing now, but where did jump rope start for you and why?
Oh, so, that's actually pretty interesting, because as a kid, I'll be the first to tell you, I absolutely despised jumping rope.
No way. Are you serious?
I'm so serious. And here's why. So I've got 2 older sisters, right? And, double dutch was a huge thing, for girls growing up where I'm from. And I mean, like, you couldn't go, 2 blocks without seeing a group of girls, jumping double dutch, right? And my sisters, they're both older than I am, and they made me like a permanent turner. They would never let me jump.
That's
ever.
A bummer.
I'm telling you, they would never let me jump. And so one day I'm just like, you know what, screw this. And I went, to go play with the boys, picked up a basketball, and never turned back. And I'm so serious. That was my experience with the kid as jumping rope. I absolutely hated it.
Wow, I didn't know
and
that.
So
That's
yeah,
cool.
and so I tend to work out at home. Like I turned my basement into kind of like my own home gym, and you see that a lot.
It looks
on
really
my
cool.
Instagram. Well, thank you so much. So I literally own like any piece of equipment you can find in a gym. I probably already have somewhere off camera.
That's awesome. Wow.
And so I went, and I've never really been a runner. So I can run for days. I've always been able to just run, but I don't enjoy it. So like basketball, that was different, because I feel like there's a method, or there's a reason behind all the running. But just going out to run, while some people love that, I've never enjoyed it. And once I stopped playing basketball, I kind of felt like I've got to figure out a way to start getting more some dedicated cardio in, because I also believe that the way that I train, there's always kind of like an cardio aspect included, just because of the way that I train. But I needed like a dedicated form of cardio. I went out, I bought the Concept 2 rowers, so I have one of those. Use that for a bit. I don't use that often. I have the Airdyne bike that you see a lot in CrossFit. Use that a bit. I don't really care for it. I tried cycling, all those things, and it just never really jived with me. So I needed something. I was in search of something that was a bit more, kind of cardio focused. So one day, I found this old Rogue jump rope, and it's a wire rope. It was really thin.
Yep.
And I don't even remember like buying the rope, but I had it, right? And so I picked up the rope and was like, well, let's give jump rope. It was just completely random. It was so random. Like, let's give jump roping a try. And so I picked it up. Now, when you're just starting out, a skinny wire rope is not the rope to start with, right?
Oh my gosh.
And
I
so,
could go out at length about why it's not. Yep. 100%.
Exactly. And so at the time, I don't know this.
A thin cable, that is. Some of the thicker ones are very good, and we use those for beginners. But like that thin speed rope, oh my gosh, it's not what you need.
And that's the only one I was referring to. The thin wire rope is not for beginners, and that was all I had. And so you think about the challenge of, one, not knowing what I'm doing, and then two, you compound that by using a rope I probably shouldn't be using. Like it was god awful. But the athlete and the competitor in me refused to be defeated, right?
Yep.
So what was supposed to be, again, it was one of those things. What was supposed to be kind of like just this 5-minute warm up, kind of turned into an hour-long. Like, what are you doing? I'm not sure, but let's keep going because this is fun, and I'm totally getting my butt kicked, right? So it was like this.
That's awesome.
It was like this immediate challenge where like the competitor in me was just like, you will not defeat me, right?
Yeah.
And so from there, I went to YouTube and just started trying to, find whatever I could related to jump roping and learning more about it. And is there a way to learn skills so I don't feel like I'm just leaving every day completely welted
yeah, seriously though
from all these misses with my thin wire speed rope, and so that's kind of my story into skipping rope and how that was birthed from me. For me, it was, one, I think, the pairing of I won't be defeated and picking up the wrong rope that really solidified my relationship and my love with learning.
That's
so
funny.
much
So
more about this tool.
If it would have been too easy, then you might not have kept doing it.
Precisely. And so that's why, like, I was mad that I picked up the rope. Like, now in retrospect, it's just kind of like, I think back and it's like, what were you doing picking up that rope? Because, now I know better. But back then, had I picked up a rope that I think a rope that would have allowed me to fare a bit better, I don't know if my attachment to it would have grown the way it did. Has now allowed my love for it to blossom and bloom the way that it has. So I'm grateful for that negative and all those welts and everything in that session.
Well, the welts definitely give you more of a sense of pride in your skill. That's for sure.
Indeed,
when you actually
indeed.
are able to progress. But so then from there, you started purchasing a bunch of different ropes from a bunch of different people and were able to try out a lot of different styles. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So from there, I started. Cross rope was the first, rope that I'd come across on YouTube, and huge shout out to those guys and Dave Hunt, the owner. Like I said, I'll always be one of the first to say that cross rope was one of my first loves when it comes to my journey, just kind of the evolution of my jump rope journey. That was where I was able to learn a lot of the foundational or basic skills, if you will, and I feel funny throwing around terms or names because I find that depending on kind of where you find yourself in the jump rope world, if you will, or within the community, these names, they just have so many different names. So like, the basic step or the alternate foot step or the run in place. But a lot of those, the foundational moves I was able to learn through cross rope. But with that approach, it was very fitness fashioned, if you will. It was, being able to perform a certain number of basic bounces or the basic step in a certain period of time, right? And so that was my initial experience with it. And then as I continued to learn, I just started to see various styles and learn about the concept of freestyle or competitive jumping. And so I started investing in, the RX Smart Gear ropes and a few Rush Athletic ropes or the Buddy Elite jump ropes. I mean, if there's a brand of jump rope that exists, I guarantee you, I own them, and I own them in excess. So I
nice.
easily own over 100 jump ropes, and I'm not playing.
Well, you know what? It's funny you say that because I am exactly the same way.
Yeah.
I have bags and bags
And
of
bags and
ropes.
bags
Yep.
and bags and bags. And I think it's a great thing. I'm very happy to be able to spread that jump rope wealth across the community. And I don't even mean from a purchasing, putting money in somebody else's pocket standpoint, because I even have my own jump roping line. And I'll be the first to say that I still call upon various ropes for various reasons, but I also take pride in being able to do pretty much any skill that I've spent time learning with any and every rope that I own.
Versatility is key.
It's so key. You made a post about that, the other day, and I couldn't. I mean, you could not have been any more spot on. And and for that reason, I continue to invest in various types of ropes. Now, I think anyone who spends time skipping rope, they have their favorites, and rightfully so. But being able to call upon different ropes to do different things, and knowing the types of ropes that fare better in certain situations, I think is a beautiful thing. But then, like I said, being able to do almost all of your skill set with any rope you pick up, I think it's a skill in and of itself that I hope doesn't die down as many more brands begin to come onto the scene and offer the jump rope community just a versatile amount of different ropes to use. So.
Yeah. And yeah, no, 100%. And so there's a lot of purpose behind what you're doing, and I kind of want to jump into that because you talk a lot about mental health and how
I sure do.
Yep, how jump rope fits with that perfectly. Let's get into that.
Okay. So where do you want to start?
Let's start with, I mean, there's so many different places we could start. Let's go with your journey and how it's helped you, because you were talking about clarity and flow earlier. So let's kind of get back to that.
Okay. So we'll start at the beginning for me. And, if I end up getting emotional, I apologize. But
it's okay.
that will just be evidence of why the jump rope is so personal to me, and why, pushing the message of mental health awareness is so personal to me. It's so personal to me because it is personal.
Yes.
And I say in October of 2016 is when my jump roping journey began. I joined this jump roping group on Facebook. It was a group that Crossrope has put out. And at the time, I think the community may have been around 3,000 members, if that. And today, I think it's grown to about 100,000 members on their group, or 80,000, somewhere in that range. So I think that speaks to the fact that jump roping is really taking off right now, which makes me so happy to be a part of this community. But getting back to what I was saying, I ended up getting, I want to say like late November of 2016, early December, I ended up getting really sick. And I mean, really, really sick. In the course of the past 2 years, I've probably missed over 6 months of work at times, the stints being as long as 3 months at a time.
Oh, wow.
And I had 2 of those alone. So it was more than 6. I've missed more than 6 months of work in the past 2 years, just kind of dealing with a chronic illness that I have. But during that time, one of the things that happened to me that I still deal with on a daily basis, I think that was the first time in my life that I was ever faced with being unable to trust my body. And for a person who's been an athlete my entire life, like I could literally go out and play 5 basketball games in a day, and then get up the next day and do the same thing. So because of that, I've kind of taken for granted what my body has been able to do. And so finding myself in a position where I didn't know if my body would be able to get out of the bed or walk down a flight of steps or walk up a flight of steps was a very, very difficult time for me. And I've always dealt with anxiety throughout my life, but this kind of took my battle with anxiety and my struggle with depression to a level that I was not prepared for, and that I did not know was even a real thing. And it got so bad at times that as I started to heal, and I started to get better, and we started to work out, various medications that would work for me. I would, have a couple good days and then find myself bedridden. I stopped wishing to get better, and I started wishing to be well enough for a day to just kind of exercise. So I speak to that. I started wishing for an opportunity to just kind of skip rope again, because I kind of just started getting into skipping rope before I got sick, right? And so there was already this kind of, I was so intrigued. I hadn't been challenged in once I stopped playing basketball. There was nothing that really challenged me in that way until I picked up a jump rope in October 2016. So then having that journey kind of halted and be halted so unexpectedly by a health crisis, that desire, that burning passion to keep learning and to keep growing was still there. And belonging to that Facebook jump rope community, it was so huge because the community was so small at that time and people realized I wasn't posting. It was my first kind of outlet outside of my family to feel like there's a group of people that care and are wondering why you're missing. And it was all kind of still centered and focused around jumping rope because it was a jump rope group. And so I found myself wanting to get, just hoping for moments where I'd be able to skip rope again. And as I started to get better, I started to notice that on the days that I was well enough to skip, once I was done, I found my mental state to be in a very different position or different place than when I was unable to work out. And so instead of wishing to get better, I started wishing that I just had an opportunity to jump rope. I started wishing for an opportunity to challenge myself in a way that I had missed, that kind of allowed me to accrue, if you will, these kind of little wins. It was like I would go into a session to jump rope, right? And go in with a skill that I at the beginning of the session I was unable to do, but I was able to put in, and at that time it wasn't a ton of time because, like I said, my body was failing me, my mind was failing me, and so where I found my body failing me and my mind failing me was just like, okay, here's this world that I now found myself in, where I feel so incapable, I feel so unable to do things, I feel so emotionally drained, I'm so worried about so many things in this space, right? But then there was this tiny space that I would go into, and I would get these tiny wins, and I would leave feeling like here's this place where I'm winning, right? Here's this place where I feel like I'm losing, and I'm losing perpetually, right? But then here's this tiny space that's just mine, that I have complete control over, that no one else can affect, or good or bad. This is just me. This is just this rope. And here in this space, only the two of us exist. And at the end of this, something is given back to me that I worked for, right? So it was like in these spaces, in these minutes of time that I was able to carve out, that I was well enough to skip rope, I was able to give so much back to myself. And I just began to build on that. And as I started to get better physically, I noticed that those moments were doing so much more for me mentally, because it was giving so much of myself, my self-worth, my view of self, my
you were earning
sense
every
of self.
step of it.
Every step of it, I had to go out and get. And nothing gave it to me except for me, that space and time, and that jump rope, right? Because at that time, that really was all that I was doing. I wasn't strong enough to kind of put weight to anything that I was doing. It was just here's what my lungs, whatever time I was able to go downstairs in my basement and give, it was whatever my lungs, had to give for that day. And sometimes those sessions were 15 minutes, but they felt like 50, right?
Yeah.
And all of those moments were earned. All of those moments were mine. All of those moments I had to work for. And so it was like this relationship that was built out of a need to feel like I could do, a need to feel like I could be. And as I started to kind of wonder, why is it after these sessions, do I feel this emotional boost? Like, there has to be some science behind this. And I couldn't figure it out. And I didn't know who to talk to, kind of to have this conversation without sounding crazy, right? Like, I was already battling anxiety and depression, which I think are things that I think the main killer in those things is not even the anxiety and the depression itself, but it's the fact that you feel like you have to suffer in silence. And so that isolation, I think, is what makes those types of, kind of mental conditions or illnesses, if you will, 10 times worse than they already are. And so I couldn't figure out really why I was feeling that way. And so dealing with the anxiety and the depression that I was already battling, not being able to go and talk about that outside of my family. And then now here's this, why am I feeling emotionally better after I jump rope, right? Like, why am I feeling like I can go and conquer the world after I've had a great exercise session? Like, there was no one for me to kind of bounce these ideas off of. So I immediately went to the internet. I started reading, and I started finding all of this literature about the connection between exercise and mood enhancing benefits, or the fact that exercise, regular, consistent exercise has scientifically been proven to be, as effective as certain antidepressants when treating mild to moderate, depression, and like all of these things. It's like, I think there are so many people who can benefit from my experience.
Yes.
And while I felt like I had to suffer in isolation, I can only imagine how many others feel the exact same way, right? And not only are they feeling the exact same way, but they may not even know that tapping into something as simple as exercising, or more specifically, skipping rope, something that is affordable, something that is portable, something that isn't weather restrictive, because if it's raining outside, most places you can find a pocket in your house to skip a little rope, right? To get 15 minutes in. And so here's this tool that I can share, that I can give back to people who I know with everything in me are going through on some level the same thing that I went through. Damn the six pack, damn the
the vanity metrics.
The vanity. Thank you for that. Damn the vanity metrics. But going into a space where all you have to call upon is yourself and your dedication, and to know that every time I go in to give, I leave getting, right? And I had complete control. Like, it does something for your psyche. It does something for your ability and your will to want to continue. And then to know that there's a scientific component, that these things are fact. Like, I'm not just saying this. This isn't just a feeling that I feel. Like, there are countless studies that speak to what exercise is able to do for people who suffer and struggle with mental health conditions. And when I say mental health conditions, this could be anxiety. This could be, and anxiety has many forms. There's social anxiety. There's general anxiety disorder. There's health anxiety, which is most commonly known as hypochondria. And I hate to use that term because that term has such a negative connotation, where you hear hypochondriac and you think a person who makes something up. And that's actually not what it is, right? And so that was one of the main things I went through, was health anxiety. And so the medical world has really tried to change that terminology from hypochondriac to health anxiety, because when you've gone through a traumatic situation where you feel like you can't trust your body anymore, and now every sensation you get, you're not sure, and you find yourself not being able to trust yourself. You're not sure if your body is telling you, oh, we're about to go back into this dark space, right? So immediately everything starts to shut down. Now I found myself in a full-blown panic attack because I've got a headache today, right? But I remember that dark time I was in for 6 months, where my head hurt for 6 months straight, and a headache today could just be a headache today. But to a person who's been there, does this headache today mean that I'm about to go? It means something completely different, right? And so now you find yourself in this downward spiral, being completely unable to save yourself. And then from there, it just continues to spiral and continues to spiral.
So the jump rope, then, were you able to use that as a tool to
intercept?
Yeah, intercept.
Exactly. Absolutely. And even like, just through my research, there's an awesome book called Spark.
It's really funny about that. One, I was going to ask you about that. Two,
Yep.
I'm staring at my copy right now. That's why I was going to bring it up. Yep.
And it is like the Bible to me for everything that I went through, right? Like, trying to find reasons why, like scientific reason behind why I was having these immediate good feelings about myself, or just about carrying on, right? Like, what are these psychological benefits that I know that I'm experiencing from skipping rope, or from work, whatever your desired style of working out. I am a little biased to the jump roping, and for a reason. It isn't just because I love to jump rope. I do think jumping rope has a different it has added benefits to just exercise because it calls upon your cognitive ability and rhythm and strategizing and all those things that not all exercise is going to afford you. So while exercising is good, finding when you're dealing with mental health challenges, finding an exercise that's going to challenge you both physically, but also mentally through and through, you'd be hard pressed to find an exercise apparatus that is going to challenge you through and through, full body and mentally, as efficiently as the jump rope. And so that's why I'm such an advocate for it. But talking about Spark does an excellent job laying out scientific evidence.
Science-based.
It's all science-based, and it talks about all different forms of mental health conditions. So, I mean, from the spectrum of autism to ADHD to anxiety to depression to obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a subset of anxiety disorder. So that's often, kind of one of the blanket, or anxiety you'll hear is one of the blanket terms for OCD. But for a person with OCD, OCD is just OCD, right? So then there's that as well. But in all of these things through and through, he talks about how exercise, it can be used as an effective form to helping treat so many of these conditions. And it's such an untapped regimen, if you will, or I don't want to say a drug. It's an untapped advantage.
I mean, there's something to be said that it's a drug in terms of like, and also he referenced he being the author, John Rady.
Rady,
mispronouncing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's something to be said of it as a drug because I mean, you have hormones and neurotransmitters that are floating around in your head, and there's a lot of different ways to look at that in terms of, like you're talking about. The conditions, different conditions give you different sets of hormones and stuff. But as John Rady explains in the book, when you're actually working out, you're basically rewiring that the same way you would be with
medication,
a supplemental drug or substance.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. You use again. Here you go, hitting the nail on the head again.
It's funny because I think about this stuff a lot. Actually, quick side digression. I have purchased neuro and neural science textbooks, and I just read them occasionally. So,
wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, well, not the whole thing at once, but I definitely pick out sections because, what you're talking about is very, very real and very real to me.
It's very real. It's very real, and so that's why my mission is so important, and that's why my approach to working out, just in general, is the way it is. And again, that's kind of to go back to, the whole thing. It could be seen as a drug. Like I say, if there's ever a high to chase, it's the high that I get every time I am finished working out.
Seriously, because what's so unique about that high is that it's a domino effect into literally everything.
Into everything.
You can take ibuprofen and your muscles will feel a little bit better, but if you go work out, you're gonna be like, I should also eat a salad. I should also wake up earlier.
Absolutely.
I should also all of that stuff.
Absolutely, like it just boom, 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 and then like I was saying to my point earlier, you find yourself not hitting these these vanity metrics. You find yourself not hitting these plateaus when you just change the narrative a little bit. Sometimes, and this could be applied to anything in life. When you find yourself going through something that you can't seem to find your way through. Sometimes it's as simple as, instead of like, hey, I need to go to the drawing board. This sucks. I'm scrapping the whole damn thing, right? Which is what happens when you hit a plateau. Like, I can't lose these last 5 pounds. Forget it. I'm just going to have 8 cheeseburgers, right? Because now I'm sad and now I'm, right?
Yep.
If you just change the narrative a bit, just change the narrative a little bit, sometimes that makes all the difference in the world. And that is my mission, to change the narrative just a little, so that my beautiful people, right, my mental health warriors, that they know that they've got a little bit more of a fight in this game than they may know that they currently do.
I 100% agree with that. And I think another way of restating exactly what you just said is, changing the narrative. You can also change your expectations.
For sure.
Instead of expecting to surpass yesterday by a huge leaps and bounds, we can try to get 1% better today. And that might be, yesterday you got off of meal plan and you had those cheeseburgers for dinner, right?
Yeah.
Today you managed to stay on top of most of it and you only had 1 cheeseburger instead of 8. It seems so it's small, but it's not,
Right.
And you just stack, if you get 1% better every single day for a year, it's a lot of tiny little gains, but then you end up being a 365% better by the end of the year.
Absolutely. Perspective is everything. Perspective is everything. And just to take that back a little bit, because I'm always looping things into what my mission is, right?
Yes.
Like you say, these smaller wins, if you will, or changing the expectation. Sometimes it's as simple as not even just being better than yesterday. Sometimes it's as simple as I need to get through this moment. And for a lot of people dealing with mental health conditions, dealing with anxiety and dealing with depression. And I say those two a lot because for me, those are the two that I dealt with personally.
Yeah.
And there are so many more under that blanket. So I don't ever want anyone to feel like when I say anxiety and depression that's all that there is. But I tend to speak to those because that is my personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
But because that is my personal experience, sometimes you find yourself so deep in where you are that all you need, right? All you need is something that's going to help you get through this moment right here, right? To kind of jumpstart that cycle of maybe I can, because what you find a lot of times when, you find yourself in a depressive episode that can last for weeks and weeks at a time, or you find yourself riddled, like I'm telling you, riddled with anxiety to where every day you were on high alert, like your brain is literally in an anxious state. And if you've never dealt with that, I mean, good God, think about like if something scares you or if you're, that fight or flight response, think about being there.
Yeah.
Where like 24/7, right? And not being able to turn that off. Oftentimes you'll start to confuse like motivation with ability, right? So it's like I've heard people, who deal with depression personally, and I've had these conversations like, when I find myself in a depressive episode, like I simply can't get out of the bed to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, you kind of got to be very careful, right? Because that is a very vulnerable time. So it's like, you got to be careful not to confuse ability with motivation. So it's like, my motivation is so depleted, right? It's so depleted right now. And that is a very real fact. And I don't ever, and I say that, like, I feel okay saying this because I know what it's like to be there, right? I'm not just saying this as someone on the outside trying to tell someone dealing with depression how that is or how that should be. But you got to be very careful, not to confuse or not to stay in a space where, because I severely lack the motivation to be able to get up and do anything with the fact that I'm incapable or unable to do those things. And so sometimes it is as important or it is as simple as getting through the moment. And exercise is excellent for that because sometimes it can get you through the moment. I've read, I think John Rady even talks about this in his book, Spark, that, for panic disorder, like finding yourself in a full-fledged panic attack, one of the ways to interject and halt and paralyze that immediately is to immediately engage in, like, if you don't have access to, if one of your rescue medications when you find yourself in a panic attack is Xanax, right? Or something like that. Something you can use in place of that, like let's say you're not on medication, but you find yourself in a panic attack, is to immediately submerge yourself into heavy, intense physical activity, right? Like that is groundbreaking. But how many people know that?
Yeah.
How many people dealing with
anxiety
I didn't know that
until you just said it
exactly.
right now.
Right. And so that's why my mission, like it's just vanity metrics I could give, and I don't mean to cuss, but it's like I could give two shits because it's so much bigger. It's so much bigger than that.
It's really hard to track that too, because one day you might feel great and the next day you could have no change in your body fat at all, or maybe even like 1% change or whatever the exact amount is. And you might feel subjectively so much worse, but you're not objectively,
Right.
And it's not as good of a marker. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not. So
any other books that you read or recommend or have been good?
Oh gosh. I might have to, I have so many, like literally you make me want to go to my bookshelf right now, but I don't really want to kind of disturb my zen. I also don't want to give titles without authors. So if we could loop back and I'll actually grab a few, because I absolutely love to read. I do have a ton of recommendations of just some really awesome books.
Yeah, totally. That works.
Yeah.
Wow. We've really covered, I feel like, so many awesome things. Yeah. And I'm really glad we did. This is really cool. So I guess then, we'll kind of come to the main question of the podcast, and in certain ways we've answered this, but to kind of bring it all together, what is jump rope for you?
if I had to answer that in one word, jump rope for me is life. And that could be laughable, or it's like, one of those trendy words, such and such is life, or everything is right.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, like I mean that literally. Jump roping is one of the things. Like I said, it's so personal to me. Jump roping, in addition to the incredible support staff I had at that time, support staff, the support system that I had at that time in my life. Jump roping saved my life. Because there were plenty nights that I went to bed so afraid that I wasn't going to wake up, and kind of just tired that waking up the next day would be just like today. And so that kind of speaks to that time where I talked about I stopped wishing to get well, and I started wishing to be well enough to just work out. I wanted to be well enough to just jump rope. And so at that time, it was the one thing, aside from my family and my friends, very, very small group of friends, it was the one thing that kept me pushing. It was the one thing I had to look forward to when everything else was awful. And so for me, jump rope is life. Jump rope is everything.
Man, wow. Yeah, that really ties it up. I think that's probably going to be a nice little spot to kind of press end for this time. We're definitely going to have a round 2 at some point.
Okay.
For sure. And I think that's a good marker here. And
awesome.
Thank you so much for being on. And I really appreciate you being so open about your journey and talking about all this.
My absolute pleasure. You kind of got to be careful. I won't say be careful, but social media it's a funny thing where if you push a narrative too much, people feel like you're trying to push it down your throat. Mm-hmm. And then when if you don't, you're not talking about it enough, then you're kind of not using your platform to do good.
Yep.
And so I've tried my best to kind of find a happy medium where I'm pushing something that is so personal to me and is so necessary.
You're definitely succeeding.
For you to say that is one of the biggest compliments I think I've ever received in life, because I mean that. I really do, because it is a fine line, and when it is so personal, that it's about something as serious as saving another life, and you may not even know that you're doing it, but the mission is that powerful because it is your own.
Yes.
So I constantly, when I post content, I try to keep it jovial and playful while always still trying to push home a positive message or something, just something to feel good about, whether it's in the content of laughing, the comment section, the caption of laughing at myself, or telling you to have a nice day because no one, maybe no one did today, or, it's just, I love this all. So.
Man. Yeah. Yep. Definitely gonna have to around 2.
Yeah,
for sure. I can already tell.
Sure.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored that you took the time to speak with me and allow me to be vulnerable and transparent, and that you were so welcoming of that and to that. I thank you very much for that.
Always 100%.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll definitely be catching up again. But for this episode, I think we're gonna call it a wrap.
Perfect.
Awesome. I'll talk to you later.
Take care, Nate.